It's just after 7:15, and MPs have called for the system that gives schools in England a one- or two-word judgment, like good or inadequate, to be scrapped. They say they have widespread and deep concerns about rating schools in that way.
Their inquiry was commissioned after the suicide of primary head teacher Ruth Perry. An inquest separately found an Ofsted inspection had contributed to her death. We're going to be talking to Ruth's sister Julia in just a moment, but first, this report from our education editor, Bronwyn Jeffries.
The head teacher and deputy of a small primary in Leeds, both leaving their jobs because of Ofsted. Their school went from good to inadequate and back to good again last year, an experience they told me broke their trust in the system.
It was a moment in time that I'll never forget. It was a moment in time when I looked over at my deputy Kate and I could see in her eyes, and I'm sure she could see in mine, that this was it. This is actually happening to us, and it was a heart-sinking moment. It was incredibly difficult, incredibly emotional for me, and incredibly lonely.
The impact of having ourselves described as inadequate was traumatic, and is something that will always be there, and is one of the main things that has stayed with me from the process.
In June last year, inspectors visited. They didn't like the record keeping on children's welfare. Everything else was good, but the whole school was labelled inadequate.
Because what subheadings do we have left to do?
For staff and families at the school, the judgment was a shock. Within 3 months, the school was re-inspected, this time judged good overall. There was no evidence any child had been at risk. Today, MPs say this kind of judgment is wrong. They call for one- or two-word judgments of schools to go. Inadequate judgments on safeguarding, only where a school is fundamentally failing to keep children safe. With less frequent, more detailed inspections for good schools and more effort to capture parents' views. Overall, MPs say school inspection needs to work for parents and for schools.
What we heard is that trust has come to a low ebb in recent years, that there is a need to rebuild trust with the profession. And I think following the tragic events at Caversham Primary and the death of Ruth Perry and what we've seen from the coroner's inquiry there, I think there is a need to reassure the profession around the role of Ofsted, and that Ofsted takes teacher and leader welfare very seriously.
If you're a parent, there's a good reason that you should care about this. Head teachers are leaving their jobs early because of the pressure. Not enough people want to step up to do the job. And we know that who leads a school makes a huge difference to the pupils.
I think there needs to be a systematic rethink of the approach that Ofsted take. The one-word judgments need to be not in existence.
That's a decision only ministers can make. Labour say they would move to a report card for schools. Some changes are already happening in school inspection, but it feels like bigger ones may be on the horizon.
That report from our education editor, Bronwyn Jeffries, who joins us now on the sofa, alongside Ruth Perry's sister, Professor Julia Walters. Good morning to both of you. Julia, can I ask you to start with, you've been wanting change within Ofsted into the rating system and how it works. These proposals today, is it good enough? Does it go far enough?
Yes. I just hope that the government now realise how untenable their position of hanging on to those harmful and reductive single-word judgments are, and actually make the changes that are needed to keep teachers and therefore children safe in schools.
So you want them to act on this report?
I want them to act. I've had, I think, 18 hours of meetings now with the DFE, the Department for Education, and Gillian Keegan this last year. They have made some changes, but they don't go far enough. I've been arguing that, and the one key thing that would make the most sort of appreciable change would be to get rid of single-word judgments. So, come on. Get up, Gillian, Gillian Keegan, and make those changes now, please.
So in those 18 hours where you have sat, I'm assuming, face to face with these people, How do they counter your arguments? I'm interested to know what they say to you about why we don't know when this is going to happen.
It's the same lines all the time about parents appreciate clarity and simplicity when deciding on which school to choose for their child. And my argument always is, one, parents don't generally have that much choice. What they want is their local school to be good enough. And two, that these words, one word can never sum up a school, let alone a horrible word like inadequate. And no, it doesn't help parents to be treated like imbeciles, really, that they can't read a report, they can't see beyond one word to look at the details and make the decisions for themselves. But yes, the DfE's argument all the way through is this: it's simple, it's clear, and it's what they do across hospitals and care homes and prisons and so on. And so, they need to stick with it.
Bramwell, it was interesting in your piece there, hearing from those schools in Leeds, where the significance of a word and the word changing very rapidly and the impact that can have.
And what really struck me about that was Kate, the deputy head we've just heard from. That word inadequate, which I know really weighed on your sister's mind, also weighed on hers. And she found herself writing it out time and time again, thinking, am I inadequate? I'm trying my best in the job. What's very striking about this report from MPs is the language it uses, describing a system that they heard was toxic, and saying that the word that head teachers used most often was terror. So very powerful that although people think there has to be a school inspection system, the MPs are really clear. Parents need that. They need good, clear, reliable information, that the system at the moment needs fundamental change, according to this report.
That's what I'd like to talk to you about, Julie, because what else needs to change? The one word is obviously hugely significant. Bramwell mentioned, was it the word you said terror then? How else could inspections be different?
Well, I think the Parliamentary Inquiry's report lays out some really important key changes that need to come in to make the inspection system reliable, dependable and less dangerous, less terrifying for teachers. The high stakes that now currently hang on an inadequate or two requires improvement judgments that mean that there's generally a forced academisation and head teachers lose their jobs, on the basis of the say-so of a couple of inspectors on 2 days, irrelevant, disregarding whatever the parents might think about the school and the head. So they've said that needs to stop. There needs to be a range of options. And the other thing that I think is really key is the criticism of the current complaints procedure, the lack of any independent complaints procedure, which has allowed Ofsted far too long to be completely unaccountable. It won't listen to criticism because it doesn't allow criticisms. And if you don't listen to criticisms, if you don't listen to feedback, how are you going to learn? How are you going to make improvements? If they had listened to criticisms over the years about inspectors' conduct, about the terror that head teachers feel, they might have learnt, and my sister might be here today.
There is a new chief inspector at Ofsted, isn't there, who has set a slightly different tone and mood in his public comments. Does that give you optimism?
Yes, it does. I've met Martin Oliver, and we had a long and frank meeting, and he genuinely seems committed to change. He recognises that Ofsted has lost the trust of the teaching profession and that needs to change, and it needs to change by bringing in these reforms that will make head teachers and teachers have confidence in the system, and therefore will be a system that parents themselves can believe in.
And Bramwell, this is your job day in, day out, talking to people in education. Do you feel like change is coming?
It certainly feels as though this is a bit of a turning point and there's real momentum for change. The government has to respond to this report from a committee which has a majority of Conservative MPs, and the MPs are very clear that there's a consensus for change now. And I think, John, you're right, that the new Chief Inspector set a different tone. And some of the things that this report is suggesting, he's already promised to look at. And he wants to hear from parents. He's going to launch a big consultation in a couple of months' time. So parents will have their chance to say, what do they want? Do they want deeper, more informative reports, which this report from MP suggests they do?
We know from our inbox that when we talk about this, we do get quite a lot of parents get in touch, say, you know what, I'm never in a busy life going to look through a whole report. I like the simplicity and the clarity of a one-word judgment because it gives me a headline and it makes it digestible. What do you say to them, Julia?
I would say, as the inquiry report says, that no school should be judged inadequate on the basis of minor clerical errors that can be put right before the report comes out. So by the time the Caversham Primary report came out, those really flimsy issues on which that inadequate judgment was based had already gone. It already wasn't inadequate. So how was that report ever helpful to the parents of Caversham Primary who knew Ruth, who knew the school, who flock in their numbers to get their children into that school? They never believed that judgment. So I think it's, if you haven't got time to read a report, parents, then, it's lazy and it's not really a good excuse. The reports are only about 6 pages and quite flimsy as they are. If you haven't got time to read through that and look at more detail, well, that's your lookout, but it's not for the government to decide to simplify things for you.
I think one of the key things to remember is inspections used to take a week with maybe 5 or 6 inspectors. Now it's 2 days and they're really rushed and they've got maybe a day to write it up. And that's one of the questions that MPs are asking. If you really want to help parents, should we inspect schools less often if we know they're doing well, but go in and spend more time, get to know the school and give a broader range of information. It's also worth saying that the Labour Party are proposing a report card system. So you would have a summary, but with strengths and weaknesses. And it may be that that is one of the ideas that will bubble up.
OK. Thank you both so much for coming in and talking about that. It's really interesting, and I'm sure our viewers will get in touch in numbers again. Thank you very much indeed. It's coming up to 7:30.
MPs have called for the 1- or 2-word judgments used by Ofsted to rate schools in England to be scrapped after finding widespread and deep concern about how the system works. The Education Select Committee inquiry was commissioned following the suicide of primary head teacher Ruth Perry. An inquest separately found an Ofsted inspection had contributed to her death. Ruth's sister, Professor Julia Waters, told BBC Breakfast it's time for the system to change.
I just hope that the government now realise how untenable their position of hanging on to those harmful and reductive single-word judgments are and actually make the changes that are needed to keep teachers and therefore children safe in schools.